My name is Dami Ajayi, and I'll let my fellow panelists introduce themselves first, then I'll continue.
My name is Adibola Rayo, and I have embarrassing friends. I am a writer and editor. More. My work primarily explores mental health. Not that that's deliberate. I think I usually start out writing about myself, and I guess that's a big part of who I am. So yeah.
Greetings. Thank you everyone for coming here. My name is Lidudu Malingani. I am a writer. I also take images and try to make some films.
That's not all. That's not all. You have other things to still tell us about yourself.
I think I suppose, reason for being in this panel is that I wrote a story about mental illness called Memories We Lost, and it's good to be here.
You could also have been temporal lobe epilepsy, but of course it's not. It's schizophrenia. I mean, and schizophrenia, we all know, is essentially is believed to be like if there's a king of all mental illnesses, in that it's a major mental disorder that is associated with problems with thoughts, affect cognition, perception. I mean, and it's said to be of unknown etiology and is associated with delusions and hallucinations. I'm beginning to sound like a doctor. Yeah. So I've written about mental health in different capacities as a writer and as an advocate. I remember when a set of tweets were unleashed recently via the verified Twitter account of a pastor giving, information as to the cause of mental illness. I was one of those who wrote a response to that. And besides that, even as a medical student, I once wrote a poem called Romacinda Blues, which is quite popular a bit, and essentially is a poem that tries to empathize with mental health and mental illness. I'm going to ask my panelists now. I know Rayo has written quite a number of stories on mental health and illness. I know indeed that I published one of those such stories called When I Was Writing My Bones. When I was writing down my bones, it was quite a very popular story in Saraba back then, and which essentially chronicles the experiences of a lady who was going through a nervous breakdown, so to speak. Lidudu Maligani won the Kane Prize for Memory We Lost, which essentially is a story about mental health. So the question is, guys, why do we write about mental health? Who's going first?
I mean, I feel like a bit of a fraud sitting here because I really essentially have written about mental illness in that one short story. So it's not something that I've sort of like constantly written about, but I think the story was a result of years of obsession with mental illness and trying to find ways to tell that story, which in the very beginning of it, I had been convinced that I was going to make a short film out of that idea, but I soon realized that I soon realized that it didn't work as if under sort of like the conditions I was trying to make it as, it didn't work out. So my interest really in writing about mental illness was I suppose the perception that people have towards it, and that's how the story came about.
Okay, for me, it's I don't know if it's simpler or it's more complicated. Dami said that when I was writing my bones is about a lady having a nervous breakdown, but it is and it isn't, because for me that's just like what I did with that was pull different parts of my journal from at different times and in different locations and just put it together in one place, and maybe change a few things around so that it wasn't completely non-fiction. So for me, it wasn't so much like chronicling someone having a nervous breakdown. It was like, this is my life. So when I'm writing, that's what I'm doing. I'm writing my life. I'm writing what's happening to me, and yeah.
I must.
It's not okay. Yeah. Thanks.
Well, I must ask that why is it important for you to write these things that I think are very private? Where do you find that impulse? Why do you find the courage to discuss about these issues? Not that because these issues are not supposed to be discussed, they should be. But why have you taken it upon yourself? Because essentially, it's not everybody who's had such experiences that would decide to chronicle them.
I've never consciously tried to think about, what are the things we're supposed to talk about and what are the things we're not supposed to talk about. So it's like in 2012, the first time that I ever, spoke out about mental illness publicly without hiding it in a story, it was an impulse. It was somebody online talking crap, and it was almost like vomit. It's like I couldn't stop the reflex, so to say. So I think with my writing it's the same, and I think that primarily I write to understand myself better. So sometimes I'm standing at a sink, washing my hands, and all of a sudden it's like I can remember things. I mean, it's a very mundane task, but all of a sudden there's a thread of memory from my childhood or something, and it's like I have to pull at this thing till I see where it leads to. So that's how writing is for me. Like I have to pull at this thing, I have to tug at it and see where it leads to. And so what writing does for me is helps me to understand myself better, to be able to talk better in therapy, for example, because if I don't understand it, then I can't really explain what is happening. So yeah.
Sorry, can you hear anything at all? Okay.
What is that sound? Generator. Okay. We have to live with it. Yeah, are you gonna talk about your own experience in writing about mental health, even if you feel that you've just written one story, but that one story has been amplified by its the fact that it has won a Ken Prize, which is actually one of the most prestigious prizes that an African short story can win. And what that means is essentially that story has traveled far beyond your own imagination, and it speaks to something that is so urgent and important. I'm going to ask like Rayo, do you write from a point of autobiography too, or biography in general, or it's all made up?
I don't think any fiction is completely 100% made up, right? I think, it consists, some parts of ourselves. But I think for me, the part that is perhaps me in that story would be the setting of the story. So the villages, I grew up in the villages, so I know exactly what I was writing about. But the issue of mental illness has always been, since I was young, an interesting one for me because of how people view people with mental illness, and also what the responsibility of the family becomes, and how different families react to it differently. So I was obsessed with that kind of thinking, and that's how it came into the story. But there has certainly been in my family and my extended family, uncles who have my entire life dealt with mental illness. And it's been interesting also to kind of watch how the families react to that, choosing to send them to a doctor, or choosing to send them to a sangoma, or choosing to send them to church and pray. So those are the kind of ideas that I was really interested in.
It would appear to me that even in South Africa, as it is in Nigeria, our cultural beliefs about mental health or mental illness still is really very rooted in the traditional beliefs of demonic possessions and and spiritual afflictions. But then again, it's important to say at this point in time that mental illness that we're talking about essentially is not just people that hear voices or have schizophrenia. Mental illnesses goes beyond that. I mean, we have both. I mean, it's believed that mental illnesses could either be psychosis or neurosis, and the difference between both is that in neurosis there's still a touch with reality. In psychosis, that touch is entirely gone. That is, the person cannot test reality. But just to move a bit away from that doctor mode, which I'm always getting into, can we talk a bit about the history of mental illness in African fiction generally? Do you have any books or books generally that you have read that you feel has really moved you as regards mental illness generally in African writing?
Off the top of my head, I can't remember specific titles, but what I know is that I grew up with an idea of what mental illness was that was fed by, like you said, our cultural
beliefs.
Yeah, but also by like representations in Nigerian stories and movies. And sorry, when I'm thinking African writing, I'm thinking broadly, so
Okay.
the films too. And just seeing it depicted in a way that always made it seem like an extreme thing that would not leave room for any functioning. So it was always like
It was seen in terms of exaggerations.
exactly. And so for me, knowing that something was wrong early on, but not being able to pinpoint it, but also knowing that if something is wrong and you say that it's mental illness, then that means that you fall into this thing that is extreme. You know, so yeah, so I think that's like the picture that's in my head when
you think about
yeah,
mental illness. What about
in
you?
writing, in African writing.
Is there like, I don't think there's like a mental health in Africa or mental illness in African writing canon, but I'm sure you perhaps have a few books that you want to talk about.
I mean, for me as well, much of what informed the writing was really just observing society. But one book that I really, really loved and have read more than I need to is a book called The Quiet Violence of Dreams by a South African writer called Casey Lodeke. So that book for me was one of the books that I remembered when I was writing the story, and kind of like, remembered how he was writing about being in a psychiatric clinic in that book. So that for me would be one of those books. But other books that I think have had that kind of element would be Yewando's Omotoso's Bomboy, Never's Condition. So those are some of the texts that I've read. But since writing the story, I think an interesting thing has been happening in South Africa with photographers. There's about 30 photographers who have explored depression in their photography. So that, for me, has been also interesting to kind of watch that kind of development. And it's really been interesting to kind of, because, one of the photographers suffers from depression, and so he created this amazing work of photographs. And so it's been amazing to kind of see that people, I suppose, working through mental illness, in different art forms.
But it would seem to me that the discourse about mental health and mental illness seems to revolve around those who suffer from it, their carers, either in the hospital or in the family. Because, I mean, essentially that's even the panelist. I'm sorry, Nero K. Wallace was supposed to be on this panel, but he had something urgent to attend to and he couldn't make it. But essentially, it seems that that conversation is only the conversation comes to you when you are in the heat of it. Say if you're in the meat of it, as opposed to the society itself having a conversation about it. It's almost like, for instance, around us in Nigeria here, the psychiatric hospital is called Yaba Left, which essentially means like it's on the left side of Muritala Mohammed Way, which is a one-way. right? So if you do anything on T-word, people will
I talk about it, I write about it, like, are you crazy? Don't you know what people will say? That would be the reaction. And I completely understand where she's coming from, but this is something that I feel comfortable doing, so I do it. But I also, like you said, at the end of the day, it's almost like it's really hard to remove it from those who are affected directly, and have a larger conversation. I don't know how large that conversation can be beyond people putting out work and, hoping.
And you said something very much earlier about visual arts, and you also did. You spoke about this photographers who are doing stuff on depression in South Africa, and you spoke about Nollywood earlier. I mean, to us in Nigeria, I don't know if you're familiar with Nollywood. I suppose you are. The idea of madness or mental illness has a certain stereotype. Usually you would see someone who is startled, vagrant, psychotic, who is probably feeding from a dustbin. And usually the idea is that this person got this illness from either his evil doing or the fact that somebody, there's a back to sender thing which is really popular in the churches here. When you try and throw an evil arrow and then the arrow boomerangs, or the fact that you probably are not getting enough protection from your family members, and then there's a gap, and then the enemies would afflict you. Is that also very popular in the way South Africans perceive mental illness?
Some parts of it, yeah. I think some parts of any community still has very negative attitudes toward mental illness. But also, just to talk a little bit, I think about, we can sort of like create the art and try to challenge stereotypes and, but I think the art itself is not going to change anything if the conversations aren't going on in the real communities, right? So the idea for me would be a clinic in the villages setting up whatever every Wednesday for people to come in to learn about mental illness, and then that for me would be actually making a difference.
But what do you think about that?
Yeah.
You thought to write a film? Because I know that, I write poetry. Who reads poetry? So I write poetry about mental illness, in which I'm trying to educate, entertain, and just make, just try and put mental health on the limelight. But I don't think my poem will have as much effect as it would as a film. Maybe a Yoruba film called Oti Yawere, Part 1, Part 2, Part 3 would be on, say, a society. So these are questions I begin to ask myself that recently there was one psychiatrist who did a film called Pepper Soup. I don't know, maybe you saw it.
Yeah.
It was a very short movie, short film, and Derele Edun was at the opening or the premiere of it. And I begin to ask myself that many of these scripts, even usually in our Nollywood films, I don't know if you watch the depiction of doctors generally in Nollywood films. Doctors usually look clueless, shirtless, tieless. They wear jeans, and the only thing they do most times is just shake their head and say, "I'm sorry. There's nothing we could do." These are stereotypes that have kind of like crept in on us since the 90s when Hollywood became such a big deal, and they're still there. So how do we take these narratives? How do we own these narratives? Are you going to, do you think it'll be necessary for us to begin to write scripts? Do you think it's necessary for us to begin to, go on air and do what the churches do and that make them popular?
I think that, yeah, for anybody who feels like that's a way.
Well, you're already a crusader, so to speak. You already have a blog. You had a blog.
Pretty much everything I do around this thing is.
Yeah, it is.
For
But I begin to
myself.
think about it in terms of, say, there's a concept called rehabilitation in psychiatry, which essentially is about helping people with mental illnesses come to the fact that they have illnesses and help them to negotiate the pathway to recovery, usually by helping them to learn skills and, you know, just advocate and all that. So the truth is, even in our hospital, we do not have anything, any strong advocacy, so to speak, in terms of going to the society and saying anything. We just have a big hospital where people just come to, and then the people that are coming in are hiding, and the people that are going out are hiding. You know, that's why the hospital has 2 gates, and I'm sure some people do not even know that there are 2 gates in the hospital. And the first gate, nobody hardly ever uses it. So the truth is, it appears as if there's a void. I mean, there's this void that we've already established in the fact that people are not knowledgeable enough about mental illness and mental health. But what are we doing about it?
Look, I mean, it is a problem, but also I do think that there's people who are doing some work towards that, and I think those people should be commended for doing that and encouraged. But I think there needs to be a lot more open conversations about mental illness, you know, from people who have one, and from families and friends and, you know, the community at large. And I think that's important to do, because I think you know, artists create, and, you know, not much we can do. So I think those kind of things are important, and I think the people that are doing that work should continue to do it. Yeah.
Oh, yes, I do agree totally with you that people are doing work, but I always like to see the situation in Nigerian condition. Say the budget for health is already low, as not as much as expected, and mental health in Nigeria gets maybe about 5% of that. So where's the money to do the advocacy? Where's the money to do anything? And the fact is that a country that has more churches than hospitals, than any real institutions, has already failed. We have more churches than anything else. We're in a country where people believe that cesarean section is an abnormal way of delivering your child. So pastors will tell you that you will deliver this baby by yourself in Jesus' name. And if you tell the woman anything contrary, the woman will believe that, you know, it's not the plan of God for her. Which leads me to what happened recently on Twitter. I think, was it 2 weeks ago, in which a renowned pastor did quite a number of tweets, a series of tweets about mental health and mental illness, in which he linked mental health and all kinds of illnesses generally to the original sin, which happens to be the sin in which
the fall of man.
The fall of man, the snake and the Eve and the Adam and the apple. Yeah, so I think this is the time that we can now entertain questions and contributions from the audience. I'm sure you're all yearning to say something about this. Please, can we get a roving mic? Please make your contributions as brief and succinct as possible, because time is against us. Please go upwards. The middle group, or the middle row, seems to have woken up this time. JIB.
Hi, I was here because of Nero, but he's not here, so you're the only doctor here. So I'll just direct the question. This is a personal story. My neighbor has, I think most families in Nigeria have one person in the long stretch that would suffer mental illness. And, you know, they have a mentally ill person in their home, locked up. They go to work. And sometimes, you know, I have 2 girls, and, you know, he had tried to attack my own space at some point, and I had to call the police. So most of the time, I just spend a lot of time threatening them, calling police, and I don't like to be in that position. But they're not taking care of their, you know, the person they should be taking care of. So, you know, why is he locked up, you know, in the house? Why is he a threat to my own space, to my own children, or my own sanity? So what should society do in situations like that, where because there was even a time, you know, he just walks around all of the corridors that belong to everybody, and then when you tell them, you know, I don't want him around my space. It feels like, okay, you are this terrible person. Why can't you just let him stroll around your neighborhood and your window and all of that? That makes you look very, very bad. That's one. Then the second one, this is a question. Depression. I don't see anybody talking particularly about depression. I watched a movie where there was this comedian. He would throw his jokes. He would have a great time. People would enjoy it. And then when he's going home, he sits in the car and he feels like killing himself over and over and over again before his wife, you know, decided to go for therapy. I think we suffer a lot of depression in Nigeria, maybe because of the situation. I mean, they are burning people on the streets. You see these things, they are live. Poverty is real and all of that. How can we tackle, maybe not chronic depression, maybe, I don't know, how do we even tackle depression? Because it seems to be a very common problem amongst Nigerians. That's it, thanks.
Let's have other questions. So we have a number of questions, and then we can answer. So let's just go ahead and pass the mic to. We'll take 5 questions, and then we would try for answers, and then we would. Please, can you?
Okay.
Yes.
Hello.
Yeah.
My name is Sean. I have an issue. There's this general idea in maybe Yoruba culture that I don't understand. Illnesses are generally related to a supernatural cause.
Please, Sean, do you mind standing up?
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Illnesses are generally related to supernatural causes. The Yorubas believe in Elegbara and Shopona and all those kind of stuff, that there are gods of illnesses that causes. So generally, there's this general belief that someone that has mental illness or anything of the sort has either been caused or been attacked spiritually, like you said. So how can we resolve issues like that? And what are mental health practitioners doing about that? Also, on the organized religion part, what part do you think modern age religion, the organized ones, the Islam, Christianity, what do you think they can do about such issues? I know someone that had a mental issue, someone I've known since childhood, and rather than take him to a proper hospital or anything, they shackled him. They shackled him and took him to one place, and they couldn't even handle the issue, and they had to take him back home and everything. All because of one prophet said this, one pastor said this. What are you guys doing about it? You are a mental health practitioner and an expert in that field.
I'm not here in capacity as a doctor.
Not in that capacity. Like, what is the general society doing about it?
We are taking
there any
questions.
solutions?
Okay, so let's say I have 3 more questions. Please, can you take questions here? Yeah, there.
Hello. I'm just interested from a literature perspective about mental health. I'm interested in how we respond to writers when they write about mental health issues, and particularly how it seems either we really romanticize it or we almost just don't know what to do with it, or you almost get isolated. So for example, Dambudzo Marechera, for example, the way in which he was sort of isolated as sort of that crazy writer, as well as, you know, if you look at Bessie Head's writing, no one talks about, people talk about Maru, they talk about her other books, but no one talks about a question of power, for example. And it seems almost that we can't, it's not, particularly a question of power is not a very easily digestible book in the general sense. So I'm just interested in how you find, or what you think of the way in which we respond to when we do write about mental health, particularly when we suspect that the writer themselves might have mental health issues. What do you think that does?
Okay, Jennifer has a question, please. Can you? Jennifer. Then we'll take another guy.
Thank you. I'm not going to stand, sorry. It's a bit connected to what she's just said.
Okay.
A while ago, Adichie wrote an article about her mental health problems. And there was an outpouring from other authors on Facebook. And a lot of people were saying, oh, I suffer from this, I suffer from that. I'm so lucky she has talked about it. And later, there were so many articles coming out talking about the creative energy and mental health, that these two things are quite related, and that sometimes creativity comes from the same place as mental health problems. I don't know whether the people on the panel can talk about this. Thank you.
Okay. Ruth? We'll take Ruth's question, and then that will be all for now. We answer the questions, and then subsequently, we'll take more questions if we're able to digest this one, because these things are not easy.
Hi, I've been diagnosed with schizophrenia twice in my life, and I'm currently suffering from a post-psychotic depression that's lasted for about 8 months. And that was in Europe, so I don't have the experience of being mentally ill in Africa or Nigeria. And what I'm wondering is there a unique relationship between the African experience and mental illness in particular? And I had a question to Rayo about being female and suffering from mental illness. I read an article about how women's pain is taken less seriously in terms of physical and emotional pain and psychological pain, and I wonder if this is something that you've felt, because in my experience, I didn't feel that my gender was necessarily a factor in how I was treated when I was in mental hospitals, but I found that interestingly enough, race was more of an issue. So I would like to just have your take on that too. Thank you.
I think we can start answering the question from the back.
Yeah.
So.
So to answer your question, yes and no. I think that there is a way that people expect you to have more shame because you're a woman who has this thing, and it's almost like, who is going to marry you? And I remember being in psych, and a nurse said to me that, you have to get better and get out of here. You're too fine to have this thing. And I thought to myself, so if I wasn't pretty, would it be okay for me to have it? If I wasn't female, would it be okay for me to have it? Do you understand what I'm saying? So there's a sense in which that people expect that even if you're suffering from this thing, don't talk about it because who will marry you, or you're a woman, it reduces some. But I really just close my eyes to those things, because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter to me. It doesn't mean that it doesn't hurt in that time, which is probably why I still remember what she said, all these years later. But yeah, I just remind myself of what's important, and yeah. I mean, men probably have they probably have their own special experiences too that are linked to their gender and the perception. I can imagine that for a man, it would probably be harder to admit to depression, because he's probably not expected to be seen as weak. So yeah, I imagine that, yeah, experiences will be different across genders. I don't imagine that any is worse than the other. I don't know.
Well,
yeah.
I can say for free that mental health, marriage is protective against mental health for men, while it's not for women.
Yeah, yeah.
So, I mean, there are gender relationships too. Balganik, would you answer the question okay, she had another question about traveling and mental illness. Or the African experience and mental illness. Well, it's said, and I'm just going to quote the books now, that the people who migrate to other places often have breakdowns in that place. Usually, migration studies, Odegaard, who did something in Norway, found out that Norwegians who traveled from Norwegia were more likely to have schizophrenia than Norwegians who stayed back. And it was even worse for second generation what do they call them, endophenotypes. But also, it must be important to note that many times the paranoia of race, the culture shock, are some of the real reasons why these things happen. You are in a place where you don't have your own support system, so you are by yourself, all alone, and then the way you read meaning to what is happening around you may be different, and this might be one of the reasons why people break down in such places, and then when they come back home, it's almost as if nothing happened. I mean,
Sorry, Demi, but doesn't that just feed from something that already exists? And
yes, you know, the whole idea of mental illness, and I really do not want to talk like a doctor in this place today, is that it's believed that the etiology of mental illnesses has 3 rubrics, being the biological and the psychological and the social. So if you have the predisposition, does not necessarily mean that you would have mental illness. Okay. And that's where I would answer Jennifer's question. Kurt Vonnegut, I'm sure you're aware of the writer. Kurt Vonnegut had many siblings who had mental illness. What's his name? James Joyce's daughter had schizophrenia. So you would not be too far away to say that, and many great writers had bipolar affective disorder. Graham Greene, Sylvia Plath had depression, and many of these writers. So in a sense, it's almost like as if there's that relationship between being a genius and being ill. Because again, what is mental illness really? And that's where the anti-psychiatrists come in, and when they say that, well, mental illness, or what we call mental illness, is what we are not able to understand as a society, in the fact that we believe that there's a Gaussian curve in which everybody should be under it. If you're not under the Gaussian curve, you're an outlier. And once you begin to be an outlier, you're different from the society, and from that process, you have already begun your journey away from the norm, so to speak. And then, of course, the whole idea of romanticizing mental illness. Interestingly, symptoms like hypergraphia are symptoms of some mental illnesses, in which hypergraphia means you just write a lot. So you have people who have mental illness who just keep writing and writing and writing and writing. They don't sleep at night, they just be writing and writing. If you're bipolar and you're manic, in fact, many times you see patients who have mental illnesses and they're writers, they will tell you that, well, they like mania because when they're manic, they just keep doing all the work. It's almost like you can't get tired of anything, you just keep working and working. So I do think, well, the idea of romanticizing mental illness itself is not too far-fetched, really. You only need to read a bit into Dambuzo's life to realize that Dambuzo was ill and needed help. Maybe if Dambuzo did not live the life he lived, he wouldn't have caught the virus. If he hadn't caught the virus, maybe he wouldn't have been caught shot in his prime. If he hadn't been caught shot in his prime, he would have probably produced more great work of literature. And maybe he could have gotten treatment. He was technically living on the streets. So I do think, well, yes, there's that idea of, the writer as a liberal individual who must be a bit non-conformist and must indulge in all sorts of things. There are people who use mind-altering drugs to aid their work. There are many people who, I think Norman Mailer wrote an entire book smoking weed. And he wrote about it proudly, and you have many writers who use substances, alcohol, alcohol, cigarettes, and all sorts of mind-altering substances are being used. So I do think, yes, that there is actually the place where this thing comes in. But then you also meet writers who are teetotalers. Emmanuel Iduma, until recently, did not drink anything. Now he drinks red wine. Yeah, but the bottom line is that there are people who are control freaks who are also very good writers. So I do not think that, well, romanticizing the idea of mental health changes anything, or does anything to do with the literature itself. In terms of the quality of the work that is produced. I don't know if you have a dissenting opinion.
No. Kidding. So I think for me, the idea of romanticizing mental illness was incredibly important to me, because I was writing about a story that's set in the villages, and the two things that I really wanted to do was to write a society that I know well, knowing very well that it often is misunderstood, but also I had to be honest about my own critical views about that very society. So that conversation was ongoing until I finished the story, and I think even it continues now when I'm working on other things, because I'm constantly trying to present these people as I know them, but I'm also trying to be honest about what is going on in those communities. So I think, I don't know if we can ever reach a sort of a final thinking point around it. For me, it's always continuing, and I'm always trying to be critical, but also I'm always trying to open people to kind of like a society that they might misunderstand?
Well, okay. I just need to say this really now, that mental illness itself, or the concept of mental illness, is a continuum. So where you ask yourself, where is normalcy, really? Middle of nowhere, really. Because the truth is, it's believed, or it's factual, that about 1 out of 4 people are mentally ill. Meaning, in this room, if we start counting, 1 out of every four people are ill. Yes. And besides that, okay, there are just some questions that are left to be discussed. Someone asked about the role of modern age religion in mental health. I think the truth is, generally, we must all agree that the sangomas, the priests, the hospital, which has made the most advancement in psychiatry, we must all agree that, okay, well, even science itself has not gotten the total grasp of it, but it's the one that has gone ahead so far. So I do think that this modern religion should help us understand that mental illness is just as basic as having malaria, as having catarrh, which if you use your medications and use other therapies that are supposed to be, you'll be fine. And also the fact that people who lock mentally ill people up, the truth is, our legislation is, the only legislation we have in Nigeria now is currently the Lunacy Act, which is an ordinance from 1916. I don't know what obtains in South Africa, but I'm sure you guys are a bit more updated than we are. So we have a law from 1916 on mental illness up to now. If this kind of law, with this kind of law, what can you really do? 1916 is laughable. So the society needs to clamor one way or the other. I mean, I know people here who are powerful voices, who can raise their voices and, you know, get attention of people. We need to update our laws so that we can, you know, we have enough wherewithal and be conversant with what the society around us are doing. We've been told our time is up, so I think we just say our final words and then we just leave. So your final words.
I'm not really sure what I'm supposed to say as final words, but I mean, for me, this is something that is about my life. This is something that I'm going to continue writing about, whether I like it or not. It just creeps into the work, you know. But yeah, I think that different people from different subsets of society have the different strengths, and everybody, you know, if there's a particular medium of expression that you feel like you're strong in, and you would like to use that for advocacy, then that's, yeah.
And so our Ken Prize winner.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you very much.